Hello and welcome to another episode of This Week in Cleantech. It's a roundup of the week's biggest stories you need to know in climate and clean energy in 15 minutes or less. Today is Friday, July 26, 2024. I'm Renewable Energy World Editor-in-Chief John Ingle. Brett Christophers, who wrote in the Financial Times this week, will be joining us shortly. But for now, I'm joined once again by Cleantech PR veteran and good friend of mine, Mike Casey of TigerCom. Hello, Mike.
John Ingle. How are you? You look remarkably rested for a guy who's sleep deprived with a young kid, I gotta say.
Well, no, see, you only got part of the story. Yes, I wake up very early, but it's because I go to sleep very early. So these early morning hours of beginning at like 4:30 to 6:30, I know it sounds painful, but imagine to yourself 2 hours when your phone doesn't ring, no one's emailing you, no one's asking you for more yogurt. It's really good. It's really nice. Okay.
Hey, I'm going to tell you, I was at the Cleantech Leaders Roundtable dinner on Tuesday this week.
Ooh, hot
and,
shot.
A gentleman by the name of Jermaine Ponder told the entire room that he listens to every episode.
Oh,
and
wow.
he has, and I quote, a mad bro crush on Factor This and our show.
Ooh.
End quote. Dude. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
And I asked him, I said, can I quote you? And he said, absolutely. So I told him I was going to quote him on the show. And I'm going to go on a limb here, John. All right. You've been making fun of me about my pursuit of Alexander Coffin from HuffPo to come on the show. I'm going to bet you $5 we get him on in the next 6 months.
Wow.
You down for that?
What a bet. 6 months for $5.
Listen, you're talking all tough. I'm willing to put a little money on the line here in front of all.
No, sure,
listeners.
Mike. Whatever.
$5.
Yeah, let's do
and,
it.
You know, and the $5 will go to Vote Solar.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, we love you, Sachi Constantine. Yeah, here's $5. How disrespectful. Awesome. Well, Mr. Ponder, please do leave a rating and review wherever you get your podcast because we appreciate that feedback. And if you have any feedback about stories we need to cover or Clean Techers of the Week, send those over to rew@clarionevents.com. Okay, we're ready to get after it, Mike.
Catherine Blunt from the Wall Street Journal.
Oh, boy.
She writes, get ready to pay more for less reliable electricity. John Ingle.
Whenever she pulls the pen out, you know it's going to be something that's worth your time to read. Hey, Mike? I think that's definitely the reputation of Ms. Blunt.
Fair point.
Okay, so as aging equipment and increasing extreme weather events cause more blackouts, utilities are racing to modernize the grid, but utility customers are left to foot the bill for those upgrades, as we know. And just to name one example, after Hurricane Beryl rolled through Houston, nearly all of CenterPoint Energy's customers were left without power, some for nearly 2 weeks. And before Beryl, CenterPoint sought regulatory approval to raise electricity rates. Between 2013 and 2022, the U.S. saw a roughly 20% increase in outage frequency and a 46% increase in outage duration, largely as a result of weather-related damage. And Mike, as we know, the cost of T&D is going up. The cost of generation is pretty steadily going down. Your thoughts?
I like Catherine's reporting, and I think it points to a big picture frame of our negative feedback loop. So first, the traditional power grid and industrial base pollute the environment. Second, that pollution destabilizes the climate, producing more extreme weather that beats up a grid that wasn't really built to withstand a destabilized climate. Third, instead of fixing the problem they were creating for all of us, incumbent power sources use lobbyists and propaganda to deny the existence of the problem they create and grossly interfere with those of us who are trying to solve the problem. Rinse and repeat, and this is what you get. We have a choice. We can continue to go along with this ill-advised course of action that lines the pockets of the problem makers, or we can bring adult supervision to this crisis and favor the problem solvers. The choice is ours, but the choice is also clear. The longer we wait, the bigger a mess they make.
One other point I have, Mike, I was just listening to a keynote speech by the CEO of NERC, and he was mentioning that the power grid should be looked at like a three-legged stool. One leg is reliability, the other is sustainability, the other is affordability. If you prioritize one over the other two at any given moment, you're going to have imbalance and problems are going to arise. So while we do want a more sustainable power system, we do also need to take in the totality of what it takes to manage this massive machine that we created a century ago.
Absolutely.
Okay, story number 2. Our second story comes from alum of this show, Matthew Daly from the Associated Press. EPA awards $4.3 billion dollars to fund projects in 30 states to reduce climate change or climate pollution. Mike, did you like that? I'm like my own
You,
soundboard. I'm going back to
you sound like
my
you
DJ
sound like
radio roots.
you sound like George Thorogood.
Oh, I don't know
Just to
who
date
that is,
myself.
man.
Oh my God, that's all right. He was big when I was young. So anyway,
Well,
that's
when you were young, never
LPs,
mind.
LPs, John. Vinyl. All right. The Inflation Reduction Act sets aside $5 billion for the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants Program that aims to cut air pollution, advance environmental justice, and accelerate American clean energy. 4.3 billion of those grants just got awarded. To name a few, 396 million to get Pennsylvania to cut carbon pollution from cement, asphalt, and other industrial plants. 500 million will go to the ports of LA and Long Beach to add EV charging equipment and zero pollution freight vehicles. 307 million go to the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy to boost climate smart agriculture and improve energy efficiencies. These grants will be delivered this fall before the election. Question is, will anybody notice? John, your thoughts?
Yeah, so far a lot of this stuff hasn't resonated in the way we would have all hoped. We've talked about a potential IRA repeal in the future if Trump is elected, but this is yet another example where benefits are going to red states like Nebraska. Investing in energy efficiency and electrification could reduce Lincoln, Nebraska's carbon pollution by 77% by 2050, and boy, do they have that nice sweet wind out there. The grant will also give financial assistance to Lincoln, Nebraska's low-income residents through energy efficiency improvements, providing them with equitable access to the clean energy transition. All right, Mike, number 3.
Third story, Gene Chenmick from Politico. IRA's biggest climate program has, quote, decimal dust, end quote, for oversight. John.
Yeah, this one was really interesting. And usually I breeze over the IRA and bipartisan infrastructure law announcements anymore because they feel like the repeating of all of this stuff we already knew. But this was new to me, at least. The IRA allocates money to the EPA for a greenhouse gas reduction fund through which the EPA has to spend $27 billion by September 30th. A built-in deadline designed to prevent a future Trump administration from cutting it out. The program is intended to support green lending from state and local governments and nonprofits to finance the installation of clean energy and improve energy efficiency of buildings in low-income communities. But out of all the programs authorized by the IRA, this one has the smallest amount of money allotted to hire staff and track the spending. The EPA will need additional cash to ensure the grant program has, quote, proper financial management and robust oversight. Mike, I don't even think your kids could spend $30 billion in 2.5 months.
Well, I think this is basically a bet. It's a risky bet. Congressional Democrats don't want a second Trump term to see a repeal of these job-creating policies. So they want to deliver the money quickly so it can't be taken away. Basically, they're having to manage the instincts of the ideology over reality crowd that want to trade giveaways to the oil industry for $1 billion in campaign cash. So this is a lot of money going out the door at one time, and you're basically banking that you're not going to have gross, obvious wastes of money. That's a risky bet because it can be seized on by the critics in Congress who want to do the oil companies favors and jump on allegations of potential mismanaged funds. They also have at their disposal a very healthy and robust propaganda ecosystem that they can use to hype up such claims. John, our fourth story.
Yeah, this one from Rachel Millard and Amanda Chu from the Financial Times titled, Can the Solar Industry Keep the Lights On? Mike?
Man, if we could have picked a story to set up our guest in his piece, I don't know if we could have picked a better one here. Global supply glut has tanked solar panel prices. That leaves European manufacturers to want to stop their production at their plants that are located in Europe and continue operations in China. And since November of 23, Europe's solar panel making has decreased by about half. However, consumers and business solar panel installation rates have skyrocketed due to low prices. So Bloomberg New Energy Finance reports that panel prices have dropped 60% since July 22. For all the bloviating by the U.S. ideology over reality crowd, China continues to play the long game. They are out to own the energy sources of the future, and far too many political hacks and pundits here can't seem to understand that. John, what do you think?
Well, they are also going to create a lot of stranded manufacturing plants. I think when we're getting close to like sub 10 cents a watt, I think a lot of people are in trouble, and that's kind of a natural cycle that the solar industry goes through, but boy, this one might be brutal. This does impact the U.S. as well. While the IRA has generated nearly $13 billion in investments for solar manufacturing, falling prices have delayed expansion plans for solar companies in the U.S. The low prices are causing Chinese solar manufacturers to scale back as well, including the world's largest solar company, LONGi, which recently cut 5% of their 80,000 person workforce. Solar company success depends on future political decisions. Will the world depend on Asian panel production, or will countries work to build domestic resilience? All right, Mike, our guest and our fifth story this week.
Brett Christophers from the Financial Times. We must not mistake China's success on green energy for a global one. I told Brett before we taped, I don't want him to be right, although I fear he's mostly right. So, Brett, welcome. And for people who haven't read your piece, which we want them to do, could you give kind of like the top line takeaway?
Sure. Thanks for having me, first of all. Top line takeaway is that there is a narrative out there, which I think is quite a common narrative now, that renewables deployment globally is increasing very, very rapidly. The word that's typically used is exponentially, and that's obviously a very good news story. And the point of my article is simply to say that it is misleading to look at the renewables story at a global data level, simply because that data is completely dominated by the China story. And actually, if you disaggregate the data and look at things on a region by region basis, what you find is that positive growth story globally is essentially a positive growth story in China. And then if you strip that out, the rest of the world is going at a much more kind of linear rate. So the good news on renewables is simply a Chinese story, and the rest of the world is not growing renewables deployment at anything like the rates that everyone pretty much agrees is necessary.
So, Brett, you wrote a book called "The Price Is Wrong: Why Capitalism Won't Save the Planet." And we previously, in this same segment, some months ago, featured an author, Akshat Rathi's book, "Climate Capitalism and Optimism," around that structure. So, yeah. This is great. We should have had them back to back, but make your case, and I guess what the case is made in that book of why capitalism won't save the planet.
So it's the first thing to say is that it's very much focused on electricity. So it's squarely focused on the issue of decarbonisation of the power sector, which is obviously at the heart of the energy transition challenge. And the basic argument I make is that the likes of Rathi and many others are wrong, and they're wrong because they make the mistake of simply assuming that, for want of a better word, green capitalism is a good business model, and that there's abundant capital that wants to get in there and is getting in there because the returns are very, very high. Whereas if you look at renewables deployment, in reality, what you find out is that it's actually not a particularly attractive business. Profitability is both very, very volatile and actually quite low. And the argument I make is that one of the reasons why renewables deployment is going much too slowly around the world is that it's simply not a particularly attractive business. And that the argument that the big obstacles that remain are in the realm of kind of planning and kind of slow permits, slow grid connections. Yes, those things are important, but there are also some fundamental economic obstacles that remain, even though the cost of generating electricity from solar and wind have come down as much as they have. So it's basically a pushing back against that optimistic economic narrative that is out there.
Brett, we could go for an hour here because I think the viewpoints is really interesting.
Don't do that, because our listeners are savages and they will send those emails and say that you didn't do this in under 15 minutes. Give us a break. Yes. Like, we can get interested in stuff too, Yeah.
First listener, Aaron Petrie.
You've got 45 seconds left, Brett, and I'm talking through all of it.
Brett, so here's our problem though. We, at least here in the U.S., the polluting interests basically have captured government. They've captured it for a long time. So the the business side of the house is really our only card to play. If we wait around for policy making to get us where we need to go, we're going to cook this planet and we'll still be debating incremental change. I can say as somebody who spent 12 years in the NGO sector, that's why I do what I do for a living. So the thing where I often go to is, Confucius said, better to light one candle than to curse the darkness. If we can't drive change through the private sector, we're screwed. So I'm not quarreling with your critique of the imperfections in the game we're playing, but I don't see another game. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, I don't think you are wrong. I don't think you're wrong. I mean, I think the obvious kind of substantial alternative approach, which is much more public sector financing and ownership, is simply not on the table in most places in the world. So it has to be private sector led, which simply means, I think, that you have to maintain and even increase the subsidies and support mechanisms like the IRA did. Otherwise, it's going to look even worse than it currently does. So I don't disagree with you.
Good. And I just say my quiet fear is there's a lot of people who are donating to the Trump campaign who very much would like to promote your book. So don't take their help.
I definitely won't.
Well, John, we're just about out of time. We need to go to our Cleantecher of the Week.
Yeah, this week's Cleantecher of the Week is Jonathan Foley, climate scientist and executive director at Project Drawdown. Jonathan's latest piece shares the impact of agricultural pollution and how we need to prioritize sustainable agricultural practices. So congratulations to Jonathan.
I want to thank our wonderful producer, Brian Mendez, and Alex Peterson and Claire Quirin for helping us put together these stories.
Yeah, and thanks to Brett Christophers for joining us on this episode of This Week in Cleantech. That was one of my favorite closing segments that we've had. Please subscribe, give us feedback, and share your story suggestions. And you can read all of the articles we discussed, including Brett's, in the article or in the episode description by clicking those links. All right, Mike, we'll see you next time. Brett, thanks for joining us.
See you, friend.
Thanks for having me.